Every single day, brave soldiers put their lives on the line, pushing through unimaginable challenges far away from the people they love the most. But no matter how tough it gets, there's one thought that keeps them going. The moment they finally come home. Some reunions are full of laughter, others of joyful tears, but they all share one thing: pure, unbreakable love. Get ready for the most heartwarming, gut-wrenching, and beautiful soldier homecomings ever caught on camera. I promise you, this video will make you feel all the emotions, so grab some tissues, and let's begin. A high school football team was preparing for a game, but one player had no idea that his father, who had been deployed for almost a year, was standing just behind him. As soon as he turned around, he dropped his helmet and sprinted into his dad's arms. The entire stadium erupted into cheers, but to him, nothing else in the world mattered in that moment. A young boy sat in front of a massive Christmas present, eyes wide with excitement. As he tore off the wrapping paper, he expected a toy, but instead, his dad, who had been deployed for months, popped out. The little boy froze, his mind struggling to believe what he was seeing, before launching himself into his father's embrace. This was the only gift he ever wanted. A beautiful bride stood at the altar, holding back tears of joy. She was about to marry the love of her life, but there was one person missing: her brother, a soldier stationed overseas, or so she thought. As she turned around, she saw him, standing in uniform, smiling at her. She instantly broke down, running into his arms in a moment that would forever be etched in her heart. For months, the Simmons family believed their father, Captain Mark Simmons, wouldn't be returning from deployment until late next year. His youngest son, Charlie, only 6 years old, had been counting down the days on a homemade calendar, unaware that the biggest surprise of his life was just around the corner. One evening, as the family gathered around the dinner table, their mom asked Charlie to grab something from the front porch. When he opened the door, he gasped. There, standing in full uniform, was his dad, holding a bouquet of flowers. Charlie froze, his brain struggling to process what was happening, but within seconds, he let out the loudest scream and ran into his father's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. The holiday season is a time for love and family, but for many military families, it's also a reminder of those who are far from home. 8-year-old Emma had written only one thing on her Christmas wish list: "I want my daddy home." Her mother had prepared Emma for the reality that her father, who was deployed overseas, wouldn't be back in time. But what Emma didn't know was that Santa himself was about to deliver her greatest wish. During a local Christmas parade, Emma was called onto the stage by Santa Claus. He asked her what she wanted for Christmas, and she shyly whispered, "I just want my daddy." Santa smiled and turned to the audience, waving someone forward from behind the stage. The crowd gasped as Sergeant Daniels stepped out, dressed in uniform, with his arms wide open. Emma's eyes widened, and within seconds, she sprinted toward him, crying. The reunion was so powerful that even Santa wiped away a tear. The entire crowd cheered, and that Christmas became one that Emma and her family would cherish forever. For college student Maria Lopez, graduation day was bittersweet. She had worked tirelessly for years, but her father, a deployed Marine, wasn't there to see her walk across the stage. As her name was called, Maria took a deep breath, forcing a smile as she accepted her diploma. But just as she turned to walk off stage, the announcer's voice returned, saying one more thing: "Maria, we have a special guest here today." Confused, she looked around, and suddenly, the crowd erupted in cheers. She turned to see her father, standing at the edge of the stage, in full uniform, smiling proudly. Maria dropped her diploma and covered her mouth in shock before running straight into his arms. The audience gave a standing ovation and the moment became the highlight of the entire graduation ceremony. Dogs never forget their owners, and that was certainly the case for Max, a golden retriever who hadn't seen his military dad in over a year. When Officer Kyle Thompson finally came home, he decided to surprise Max in the family backyard. Kyle stood at the edge of the yard and called out Max's name. The dog's ears perked up, and he turned his head in confusion. But the moment he recognized the voice, Max bolted toward Kyle, barking wildly, leaping into his arms, licking his face nonstop, and wagging his tail so hard it seemed like it would fall off. The entire family teared up watching the reunion. During halftime at a high school football game, the announcer called out a special guest. The entire crowd watched as a teenage football player, David, was led to the center of the field. Suddenly, his military father walked onto the field. David turned, saw him, and instantly dropped to his knees, overwhelmed with emotion. He quickly got back up and ran into his father's arms, crying while the entire stadium gave them a standing ovation. 6-year-old Mia had only one wish for her birthday: to see her big brother, Alex, who had been deployed for 2 years. At her birthday party, her mother handed her a giant gift box and told her to open it. Mia eagerly pulled off the wrapping, only to freeze in disbelief as the box popped open and Alex jumped out, arms wide open. Mia immediately screamed in joy and leapt into his arms, refusing to let go. After months apart, a Marine rushed to his sister's hospital bedside, where she was recovering from surgery. She had no idea he was coming, and when he walked in, her face lit up like never before. She burst into tears, and the emotional reunion had the entire hospital staff tearing up. One military mother decided to surprise her son while he was working at a grocery store. As he stocked shelves, she walked up behind him and said, "Need help with that, soldier?" He turned around, stunned into silence, before dropping everything and hugging her tightly. His coworkers and customers all applauded, making it a moment to remember. Jolene, a beautiful golden retriever, had grown restless while her owner was away. She had started acting distant, almost aggressive, but the second she heard his voice, everything changed. She bolted toward him, tail wagging so hard she nearly knocked herself over. As she jumped into his arms, it was clear. Dogs never forget the ones they love. A soldier had been away for 2 whole years, serving on the front lines. His beloved German Shepherd, Max, hadn't seen him since he was a puppy. But as soon as Max caught his scent, he froze, then sprinted toward him with uncontrollable joy. As his soldier kneeled down, Max covered his face in endless kisses, unable to contain his happiness. A high school student sat in class, completely unaware that his older brother, who had been serving overseas, was standing right outside the door. As the teacher called his name, he looked up, only to see his brother walk in wearing a full uniform. He immediately broke down, burying his face in his hands before rushing forward for the tightest hug of his life. For months, a mother prayed for her son's safety. Every morning, she lit a candle, whispering a silent prayer, and then, one day, she turned around, and he was there. Her breath caught in her throat as she reached out, tears falling freely. "Is this real?" she whispered. It was. Her baby boy was home. Being apart for 2 years had taken a toll on these twin brothers. The moment they were back in the same room, they didn't say a word, they just hugged. No words were needed, their emotions said it all. Their mother, Rosa, had no idea that Luis had secretly planned to come home for Christmas. As the family gathered to open presents, Rosa unwrapped a small box that had a note inside. It read, "Look behind you." She turned, and there was Luis, standing with a huge smile and open arms. For Sarah Thompson, graduation day was bittersweet. She had worked so hard for her diploma, but her big brother, a Marine, wouldn't be there to see her walk across the stage, or so she thought. As she received her diploma, the principal announced, "Before you leave the stage, there's someone here who wouldn't miss this for the world." For his 80th birthday, Grandpa George didn't ask for much, just to see all of his grandchildren together. Unfortunately, his grandson David, who lived overseas, wasn't able to make it, or so everyone thought. As Grandpa George sat in his chair, surrounded by family, someone said, "Grandpa, look who's here." David walked into the room, and George's face went from confusion to pure shock. His eyes filled with tears, and he covered his mouth, unable to believe what he was seeing. 7-year-old Emma had only one birthday wish, for her dad, who was deployed, to come home. She had been counting down the days, but her mother told her it wasn't possible. At her birthday party, Emma was handed a giant box and was told to open it. She lifted the lid and gasped. Her dad jumped out of the box. She screamed in joy. For decades, Linda and her sister Maria had been searching for their biological mother, who had given them up for adoption when they were babies. Through DNA testing, they finally found her living just 3 states away. When the three finally met, the emotion was overwhelming. During a Major League Baseball game, the camera zoomed in on 10-year-old Michael, who had been chosen to throw the ceremonial first pitch. He threw the ball toward the catcher, and as the catcher removed his mask, Michael froze. The catcher was his dad, who had been deployed for a year. Michael's eyes went wide, and he sprinted toward him, jumping into his arms. Jessica, a mother of 3, was at the airport to pick up a friend when she noticed a familiar face walking toward her. It took a moment for her brain to process, but when she realized who it was, her son, who had been stationed overseas for 2 years, she collapsed onto the floor, sobbing. Her son rushed to help her up, but she held on to him. Melissa and Claire were separated at birth and adopted by different families. They had spent their entire lives wondering about each other. Finally, through social media, they connected and arranged to meet. When they saw each other for the first time, they immediately burst into tears. They hugged tightly, unable to let go, both overwhelmed with emotion. The resemblance was uncanny. For Private John Carter, the hardest part about deployment was missing the birth of his first child. His wife had sent him videos and pictures, but it wasn't the same. He carefully took the baby into his arms, his hands shaking with emotion. As he gazed at his son, tears streamed down his face.